You've spent years of your life thinking that a well-functioning intestine was an intestine that goes to the bathroom every day. And maybe you'll even be proud to have an impeccable biological clock in this regard. But I need to start this encounter with a statement that can dismantle a certainty you've carried around for decades. The frequency with which you have a bowel movement has absolutely nothing to do with a clean bowel. And the price of confusing one thing with the other is charging compound interest within you right now, as you listen to my voice. There's a layer of hardened residue, a sort of ancient biofilm, that builds up on the walls of your colon over the years, even if you go to the bathroom religiously every morning. This layer does not come off with the common fecal cake. It stays there, adhered, like a mineralized crust that reduces the ability to absorb nutrients and becomes a silent breeding ground for bacteria that shouldn't be dominating your gut ecosystem. When I show my patients during a colonoscopy the difference between a healthy colon and a colon with this plaqued mucoid, many are in shock because the person in question had a bowel movement every single day. The gut may be moving, it may be pushing the new content coming in, but some of the old garbage just stays behind, packed into the organ's natural folds. And what I'm going to reveal here is not an aggressive washing protocol. It's not a product that promises to detoxify in 7 days and leaves you dependent for the rest of your life. That's exactly what the system wants you to do. Buy the quick fix that further disrupts your physiology so that you need another quick fix the following week. We're talking about restoring a natural mechanism that your body already has, but which has been silenced by 3 specific mistakes you probably made this morning without realizing it. Think about the extent of what I'm saying. It is estimated that a person in their 60s can carry between 2 and 7 kilograms of impacted material adhered to the walls of the large intestine, depending on the accumulated diet and lifestyle. It is not visceral fat. It is not retained liquid. It is old, compacted waste that reduces the internal diameter of the colon, increases intra-abdominal pressure, and serves as a continuous source of low-grade inflammation. Functional medicine and cutting-edge gastroenterology have been documenting this for more than 2 decades. But to really understand what's going on, I need to take you inside your body, to a visual journey that starts in your mouth and ends in your brain. Imagine the digestive tract as a living mango tree, approximately 9 meters long, that meanders inside you. The wall of this hose is not smooth like plastic. It is pleated, full of indentations, villi in the small intestine and hostrations in the large intestine. These pleats are essential for increasing the absorption surface, but they are also the places where old trash finds shelter. Every time you eat something processed, every time you consume refined flour, white sugar, oxidized fats, you're adding a thin layer of glue to your intestinal wall. This glue is composed of altered mucopolysaccharides, cellular debris, dried bile salts, and dead bacteria that mineralize over time. In a person who has never done a deep cleaning process, this layer can reach the thickness of a 50-cent coin. Now multiply that by the meters of large intestine. The volume is frightening, and the worst, this plate does not hurt. It does not bleed. It does not give acute signs. It just sits there, draining your vital energy, intoxicating your blood with endotoxins that cross the intestinal barrier. And you go on thinking that tiredness, bloating, and forgetfulness are things of age. These are not things of age. These are things from an intestine that has never really been cleaned. I want to make you 2 promises now, and you're going to carry them as open-ended questions until I close them, one by one. First promise, I'm going to show you how a natural compound, present in a food that you probably have in your kitchen and solemnly ignore, is able to begin to dismantle this mucoid plaque in a period of 14 days without any aggressive laxative effects and without causing dependence. Second promise, I'm going to give you the exact sequence of 2 physiological movements that activate the so-called migratory motor complex, the most powerful self-cleaning system in the human body, which most people keep completely off without knowing it. 2 promises, 2 real mechanisms, no chemicals, no miracle pills. And the third revelation, the most surprising of all, I'm going to save for last, because it involves something that you do every day thinking you're protecting yourself, and that's actually silently sabotaging any attempt at true bowel cleansing. Stay with me, because what comes now is the scientific basis that underpins all of this, and I need you to understand what's going on inside of you before you know how to act. Let's talk about real scientific authority, the one that doesn't appear in television commercials because it doesn't sell any product. The central mechanism that explains intestinal cleansing does not begin in the colon, it begins much earlier, in a process that happens while you sleep, And that has a name: migratory motor complex. This term sounds complicated, but it's simple to understand. Imagine a cleaning crew that enters your small intestine about 90 to 120 minutes after you finish eating, and only enters when your stomach and small intestine are completely empty. This team generates rhythmic, powerful electrical waves that sweep away the remaining contents, the bacteria that have migrated from the colon to the small intestine, the cellular debris and the undigested food waste, pushing everything into the large intestine, like a garbage truck that passes by collecting what is left. These waves are mediated by a hormone called motilin, discovered in the 70s and studied exhaustively at Lund University in Sweden. Motilin is released in cycles, approximately every 90 minutes during fasting, and each cycle lasts between 5 and 10 minutes. It is a high-precision cleaning system. But there is a devastating detail. Any caloric intake, even minimal, immediately interrupts this cycle. A cream cracker cookie at 10 at night, a coffee with sweetener at 4 in the afternoon, a glass of warm milk to help you sleep. Anything that has caloric value shuts down the migratory motor complex and the cleaning crew leaves. The garbage stays there. And the next day you eat on top of yesterday's garbage. And the following week you eat over the garbage accumulated from 30 days. But I want to go deeper into this mechanism so that you understand the gravity of what happens when it's off. The complex migratory engine is not just a superficial cleaning. He is the conductor who conducts the orchestra of intestinal hormones. When motilin waves travel through the small intestine, they stimulate the release of other crucial hormones: ghrelin, which regulates appetite and energy expenditure, and peptide YY, which signals satiety to the brain. If the migratory motor complex is chronically suppressed by constant snacking, these hormones become dysregulated. You eat more than you need because ghrelin is high, and you don't feel satisfied because peptide YY is low. This generates a perverse cycle of weight gain, inflammation, and more accumulation of intestinal waste. In addition, cleansing waves have a critical immune function. They drag bacteria out of the small intestine that should only be in the colon. Without this scan, bacterial overgrowth occurs in the small intestine, SIBO. And SIBO isn't just gas and bloating. SIBO is a toxin factory. Bacteria that go up into the small intestine begin to ferment the carbohydrates you eat, producing alcohols, acetaldehyde, and gases like hydrogen and methane. Acetaldehyde is a toxic metabolite that the liver needs to process, overloading the organ. Methane, in turn, is a gas that acts as a paralytic in the intestine, further slowing intestinal transit. A study published in 2018 in Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology by researchers at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles demonstrated that patients with overgrowth of methane-producing bacteria had a colonic transit 3 times slower than healthy individuals. 3 times. Imagine the garbage sitting in your gut for 3 times longer than it should. This is an invitation to putrefaction, to the production of ammonia, indoles, phenols, cadaverine, and putrescine, compounds whose names already denounce their toxicity. These biogenic amines enter the portal circulation and go straight to the liver. If the liver is overloaded, they escape into the systemic circulation and reach the brain. The mental fog, the slowness of reasoning, the apathy you feel are not existential depression. They are putrefactive amines circulating in your blood and intoxicating your neurons. Here's what almost no one explains. When the migratory motor complex is not triggered for prolonged periods, there is also a change in the composition of bile. Bile is produced by the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and released into the small intestine to emulsify fats. But bile is also a route of excretion of toxins processed by the liver. If intestinal transit is slow, bile stays in contact with intestinal bacteria for longer, which transform it into secondary bile acids, such as deoxycholic acid and lithocholic acid. These secondary bile acids are irritants to the lining of the colon and are associated with an increased risk of polyps and colorectal cancer. A long-term epidemiological study conducted by the Harvard School of Public Health and published in 2019 in JAMA Oncology followed more than 100,000 people and found a significant association between elevated levels of secondary bile acids in the stool and the incidence of advanced colorectal adenomas. This is not alarmism, it is high-quality epidemiology. The intestine that does not clean itself properly is not only an aesthetic nuisance, it is a modifiable risk factor for serious diseases. And the most revolting thing is that conventional medicine often treats the symptom, gives a laxative, gives an anti-flatulent, gives an anxiolytic for the brain fog, without ever addressing the root of the problem, which is the restoration of natural cleansing cycles. And here, I need to take a break. Because up until here, I've dumped data, hormone names, mechanisms, and I know you're suing. But I want to take you to a more intimate place, to the human dimension of it all. I remember a patient, Mrs. Irene, 67 years old, who arrived at the office with a pile of normal tests: colonoscopy without significant changes, endoscopy without gastritis, abdominal ultrasound without gallstones, blood tests with impeccable liver and kidney function, and she sat in front of me with teary eyes saying, "Doctor, I can't stand waking up tired anymore. I sleep 8 hours and get up as if I had been hit by a truck. I look in the mirror in the morning and I don't recognize myself. It seems like I've aged 10 years in the last 2. I go into the supermarket and forget what I came to buy. I see a person I know and the name doesn't come. And I'm afraid I'm becoming a burden for my daughter." Donna Irene had evacuated every day for the past 40 years. Her gut worked like clockwork, at least that's what she believed. But when I explained that daily functioning did not mean cleanliness, that the accumulated biofilm could be sabotaging the absorption of magnesium, tryptophan, B vitamins, and that this explained the tiredness, insomnia, forgetfulness, she was silent for almost a minute. Then she said a phrase that I have never forgotten. "So I spent my whole life doing everything right, and everything was wrong." This is the feeling I find most in this office. The person who did everything they told her to do. She drank water, ate fiber, avoided fried foods, drank yogurt with lactobacilli, and yet she is exhausted, bloated, with a foggy mind, and feels betrayed. It's not her fault. The information that reaches the population is cut, simplified, and often shaped to sell products that keep the problem turning. Mrs. Irene didn't need another probiotic from the pharmacy shelf. She needed to activate her migratory motor complex, remove the old biofilm with a specific compound I'm going to reveal, and correct the mistake that nullifies any attempt at intestinal cleansing. 3 months later, she came back to the office with a skin color that I hadn't seen at the first appointment, with a twinkle in her eye, and told me that for the first time in years she slept a whole night and woke up before the alarm clock, wanting to go for a walk. It was not a miracle. It was physiology. The physiology that no one had time to explain to her in a 15-minute consultation. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now. The time has come for progressive revelations. The first of them involves an element that you know, but have never used correctly for intestinal cleansing. I'm talking about water, but not just any water, and not in any quantity, and absolutely not at any temperature. Warm fasting water, between 40 and 45 degrees Celsius, when waking up, before any food, is an ancestral physiological signaling that activates temperature receptors in the gastric mucosa, called TRPV, which in turn stimulate the vagus nerve and trigger the gastrocolic reflex in a gentle and physiological way. But here's the mistake that most people make, and that cancels out the benefit. Drinking cold or room temperature water doesn't activate these receptors with the same intensity, and drinking the water all at once in large sips makes the liquid pass through the stomach too quickly without activating the distension mechanoreceptors that also participate in this reflex. The correct thing is to drink slowly, in small sips, between 300 and 400 milliliters, the equivalent of a large cup and a half, feeling the heat go down the esophagus and spread through the stomach. This prepares the entire digestive tract for the peristalsis that will come throughout the day. A 2017 study from the Department of Physiology at the University of Naples, published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition, demonstrated that drinking warm water at 42 degrees fasting increased colonic motility by 32% in the first 60 minutes after ingestion, compared to water at 22 degrees. 32% more cleaning movement just by adjusting the water temperature. This is free, has no contraindications, and is available to anyone. The connection with real life is immediate. Those who adopt this habit report that the first bowel movement of the day becomes more complete, with a feeling of real emptiness, and not that feeling that something is behind you, that you have lived with it for so long that you already think it is normal. It's not normal. And there is an additional detail that few know. Adding a pinch of whole sea salt, the one with grayish crystals, to the warm water enhances the effect even more. Low-concentration sodium stimulates the release of cholecystokinin, a hormone that, among other functions, signals the gallbladder to release bile. Bile, in turn, is a natural detergent that emulsifies fats and helps release particles adhered to the intestinal wall. But the mistake that nullifies this benefit is to use refined salt, which does not contain the trace minerals that help in the electrical conduction of cells. Whole sea salt contains magnesium, potassium, and sulfates that participate in intestinal osmoregulation. A pinch, not a spoon. Enough so that the water is slightly salty, almost imperceptible. Donna Irene adopted this habit and told me that the feeling of morning emptying changed from water to wine in less than a week. Evacuation became more voluminous and easier, as if the intestine had been lubricated from the inside. But warm water is just the preparation of the land. The second progressive revelation is the natural compound that acts directly on the intestinal biofilm, dismantling the matrix that keeps bacteria protected and waste adhered to the colon wall. This compound is called butyric acid, a short-chain fatty acid naturally produced by the beneficial bacteria in your gut when they ferment specific soluble fibers. The problem is that with biofilm installed and bacterial overgrowth dominating, butyrate-producing bacteria are suppressed. It's a vicious circle. The biofilm prevents the production of butyrate, and the lack of butyrate allows the biofilm to strengthen. To break this cycle, you need to provide the body with the exact substrate that the remaining good bacteria need to get back to producing butyrate in sufficient quantity to erode plaque. This substrate is resistant starch type 3, present in a food that you probably have in your pantry and eat wrong. Potatoes, but specifically potatoes that are cooked and then cooled for at least 12 hours in the refrigerator. When you cook the potato and cool it, the starch undergoes a process called retrogradation. The molecules of amylose and amylopectin rearrange themselves into a crystalline structure that human enzymes cannot break down in the small intestine. This resistant starch arrives intact in the colon, where it serves as a feast for bacteria of the genus Faecalibacterium and Roseburia, which are the largest producers of butyrate in the intestinal ecosystem. Butyrate, in turn, is the main source of energy for colonocytes, the cells of the colon. It nourishes these cells, strengthens the tight junctions, reduces zonulin expression, and, above all, acidifies the colon environment, making it inhospitable to the pathogenic bacteria that form the biofilm. It's as if you're changing the pH of the soil so that weeds can no longer thrive. In addition to cooled potatoes, resistant type 3 starch is also present in cooked and cooled brown rice and cooked green bananas. But potatoes are the most practical and accessible source. A 2015 study from the Laboratory of Gut Microbiology at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, published in the British Journal of Nutrition, showed that daily consumption of resistant starch for just 4 weeks increased the concentration of butyrate in participants' stool by 40%. 40% more of the colon's main cleansing and nourishing agent without taking a single pill. Here's the mistake that cancels out the benefit. Most people eat the hot, freshly cooked potato, thinking it's good for them because it's a natural food. Hot potatoes have rapidly digestible starch, which turns into glucose in minutes and raises insulin. Resistant starch only forms with prolonged cooling. And there's one more highly specific detail. If you reheat the potato after it's cooled, the resistant starch remains partially stable, but if you eat the potato hot and then never consume the resistant starch again, the effect on the biofilm is minimal. Consumption needs to be regular, on at least every other day, to keep butyrate production consistently high. Another common mistake is to consume the potato cooled with butter, cottage cheese, or mayonnaise, thinking that this makes no difference. Excess fat slows gastric emptying and keeps the stomach busy by suppressing the migratory motor complex. The ideal is to consume the cooled potato with a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, which is a faster absorption fat and still contains anti-inflammatory polyphenols, or simply pure, with a pinch of salt and herbs. A patient of mine, Mr. Antonio, 72 years old, a former street vendor, was tired of age. He said, "Doctor, the engine is worn out. It's normal." But he had an elevated fecal calprotectin test, a marker of intestinal inflammation, even without diarrhea, without blood in the stool, without anything. I directed just that: warm water on an empty stomach, and a small portion of boiled and cooled egg-sized potatoes 3 times a week as part of breakfast, along with a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil to boost the absorption of fat-soluble compounds. 4 weeks later, his fecal calprotectin had dropped to normal levels. He told me that his mood returned, that his belly deflated, and that his wife commented that he was less grumpy. Mood improved because butyrate also crosses the blood-brain barrier and has a neuroprotective effect documented in studies from the University of Queensland, Australia, published in 2018 in Scientific Reports. His intestine had been inflamed for years, producing cytokines that intoxicated the brain, and he thought it was old age. It was not old age. It was biofilm. It was a lack of butyrate. It was a cleaning system turned off. This brings me to the third element, and here I need to take a strategic break. I am in the middle third of this encounter, and if you have made it this far, it means that this information is resonating with something deep within you. It means that you may have recognized your tiredness, your forgetfulness, your swollen belly in what I have described. So I want to ask you something simple but important. Leave in the comments the city or country where you are listening to us from. It is a symbolic gesture of community, of people who are making the decision to regain autonomy over their own bodies. I read the comments personally, and knowing where you guys are from helps me understand how this message is traveling. And if you believe that someone you love is suffering from these symptoms without knowing the real cause, share this video. Not as an act of marketing, but as an act of care, because the information that comes next is even deeper, and I want you to be fully present. The third progressive revelation is about the error that nullifies the complex migratory engine, the self-cleaning system that I mentioned at the beginning. I've already said that any caloric intake interrupts the cycle, but what I have not said is that there is a specific habit which most people adopt with the best of intentions, and which keeps the migratory motor complex permanently turned off, even during the night, even during prolonged fasting. This habit is the consumption of insoluble fiber in excess, especially wheat bran, whole flax seeds, and hard whole grains, consumed with little water. Now pay attention, because this contradicts everything you've heard for decades. Fiber is healthy, yes, but excess insoluble fiber, especially in a gut already compromised with biofilm and low protective mucus production, acts like sandpaper on the walls of the colon. It irritates the mucosa, generates microlesions, and, worst of all, delays gastric emptying in a non-physiological way. The stomach is full for longer, and the migratory motor complex is not triggered because the body interprets that there is still digestion in progress. A 2016 study from the University of Michigan's Department of Gastroenterology, published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology, showed that diets very high in insoluble fiber, over 40 grams daily, were associated with an increase in symptoms of functional constipation in individuals over the age of 60, and not with an improvement, as common sense would predict. The reason is that insoluble fiber needs a proportionate amount of water and intestinal mucus to slide through the colon without causing friction. If the mucus layer is degraded by the biofilm and the person does not drink enough water, the insoluble fiber further compacts the intestinal contents, worsening the condition. Here's the actual physiological mechanism. The intestinal mucosa produces a double layer of mucus, made up of glycoproteins called mucins, primarily MUC2. This layer is the first line of defense against pathogens and against the friction of the fecal bolus. When biofilm sets in, it degrades this layer of mucus, leaving the nerve endings in the intestinal wall exposed. Excess insoluble fiber, when passing through this unprotected wall, stimulates the nerves in an exaggerated way, generating spasms, pain, and, in response, the body slows down peristalsis to protect itself. It is a reflex of defense. What you feel like constipation isn't a lack of fiber, it's excess irritation to a vulnerable intestinal wall. The solution is not to increase the insoluble fiber, it is to restore the mucus layer and remove the biofilm so that the fibers can do their job properly. And how do you restore the mucus layer? With a specific amino acid called L-threonine, which is an essential component of MUC2 mucin. L-threonine is found in good amounts in foods such as cooked chickpeas, white beans, and pumpkin seeds. But the common mistake that nullifies the benefit is to consume these foods in heavy preparations, with excess fat, which delay gastric emptying and turn off the migratory motor complex. Chickpeas, for example, when consumed as hummus, with plenty of olive oil and tahini, are a caloric meal that keeps the stomach busy for hours. The correct way for the purpose of intestinal cleansing is to consume chickpeas cooked in salted water, pure, in a small portion, such as a handful, in the middle of the morning or in the middle of the afternoon, at a time when the stomach is empty, so that the L-threonine is absorbed and reaches the goblet cells of the intestine, which are the mucus factories, without interrupting the cleaning cycles. In addition to L-threonine, Mucus restoration also relies on vitamin A and zinc. Vitamin A is present in orange foods like boiled carrots and pumpkin, and zinc is in pumpkin seeds and cashews. But the crucial detail is that these nutrients need to arrive together in the intestine for mucus synthesis to occur efficiently. A 2019 study from the Institute of Nutrition at the University of Jena in Germany, published in the Journal of Nutritional Biochemistry, demonstrated that the combination of L-threonine, vitamin A, and zinc increased MUC2 production in cultured human goblet cells. I instructed Mrs. Irene to have a small mid-morning snack consisting of 2 tablespoons of cooked chickpeas, 2 thin slices of cooked carrots, and 3 raw pumpkin seeds. She looked at me incredulously at first, finding it too simple to work. Within 2 weeks, she reported that the bowel movement was softer, easier, and that the burning sensation she felt in her stomach had disappeared. The burning wasn't excess acid. It was the unprotected intestinal wall being irritated by food. The fourth progressive revelation involves a mechanism that directly connects the gut to the brain's lymphatic system, and which is activated by a specific type of breathing movement. You may have heard that deep breathing calms you down, but what you probably don't know is that deep diaphragmatic breathing, the one that expands the belly rather than the chest, is a natural hydraulic pump that massages the thoracic duct, the largest lymphatic vessel in the body, and also massages the intestine, stimulating peristalsis and the release of digestive enzymes. The lymphatic system does not have a heart to pump lymph. It depends on muscle movement and breathing to circulate. When you breathe shallowly, using only the upper part of your lungs, the diaphragm barely moves and the lymph stagnates. The brain has its own lymphatic system, called the glymphatic system, discovered in 2012 by researchers at the University of Rochester and published in Science Translational Medicine. This system is responsible for draining toxins from the brain during sleep, including beta-amyloid, the protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. What the latest studies are suggesting is that chronic gut inflammation, mediated by biofilm and leaky gut, congests the overall lymphatic system, and this has repercussions on the efficiency of the brain's glymphatic system. In other words, an intoxicated gut may be indirectly sabotaging your brain's cleanup during the night. Now pay attention to this detail that changes everything. The intestinal lymphatic system, called GALT, lymphoid tissue associated with the intestine, drains into the thoracic duct through a network of vessels that passes through the diaphragm. Every deep breath you take, with your abdomen expanding and contracting, compresses and decompresses these lymphatic vessels, milking the lymph toward the heart and eventually the venous system. If you breathe shallowly, this drainage is impaired and the lymph loaded with intestinal toxins becomes stagnant in the abdomen. This is what traditional Chinese medicine calls dampness and stagnation, and what Western medicine is beginning to understand as mesenteric lymphatic congestion. A 2020 study from the University of Virginia's Neuroimmunology Laboratory, published in Nature, demonstrated that lymphatic drainage from the meninges, the membranes that cover the brain, is directly connected to deep cervical lymphatic drainage, and that diaphragmatic breathing influences the speed of this flow. The implication is extraordinary. The way you breathe may be affecting your brain's ability to clean itself during the night, and it starts in your gut. Here's the memory anchor I want you to carry. The vagus nerve, the large nerve that connects the gut to the brain, has fibers that innervate the diaphragm. When you take a deep breath, expanding your belly for 4 seconds, holding air for 4 seconds, and slowly releasing for 6 seconds, you're activating the vagus nerve, which in turn sends parasympathetic signals to the gut, telling it that it's safe, that it can digest and clean. The common mistake that nullifies this benefit is to take deep breaths for 30 seconds and think it's solved. To significantly activate the lymphatic system and peristalsis, you need at least 5 continuous minutes of this breathing, preferably lying down, with your legs elevated at a 30-degree angle, which facilitates lymphatic return. 5 minutes. It seems little, but most people can't do even 2 minutes without being distracted, and the position matters. Lying with your legs elevated, you're using gravity to your advantage to drain lymph from your legs and pelvis toward your thoracic duct. This relieves abdominal lymphatic congestion and indirectly improves intestinal motility. Participants in a diaphragmatic breathing protocol conducted at the University of Tokyo and published in 2019 in the Journal of Physiological Sciences reported improved bowel movement frequency and consistency after 3 weeks of daily 5-minute practice. I had a patient, Mr. Carlos, 59 years old, a retired engineer, who came to the office with a complaint of constipation that had lasted for decades. He had done it all: laxatives, suppositories, washes, even acupuncture. Nothing worked in a lasting way. When I explained the mechanism of diaphragmatic breathing with elevated legs, he looked at me with that look of someone who has tried everything and no longer believes in anything. But he was an engineer, and I appealed to his logical reasoning. I drew the lymphatic system on a paper, showed him how breathing was the only pump available, and he understood the hydraulic principle. He began to do the practice religiously, every night before going to sleep. In the first week, he didn't feel any difference. On Monday, he noticed that he woke up with more desire to go to the bathroom. By the fourth week, he was having a bowel movement every day, with normal consistency, without effort. He went back to the office and said, "Doctor, the hose has been unclogged." The engineer's metaphor perfectly captured what happened. He used the right pump, with the right pressure, and the system started flowing again. Think about the dimension of this. You can, lying in your bed, before bed, or right after waking up, activate a drainage system that connects your intestine to your brain, using only your breath. No device, no cost, no side effects. Now, the fifth progressive revelation, and I ask you to pay close attention because it is a watershed. There is a group of foods that are sold as healthy, that are on the shelves of natural products, that well-intentioned people consume daily thinking they are helping the intestine, and that are actually sabotaging everything I have said so far. I'm talking about industrialized green detox juices and commercial fermented drinks, such as off-the-shelf kombucha. Pay attention to this detail because it is treacherous. Artisanal kombucha, made at home with symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, can be beneficial, but commercial kombucha, pasteurized and sweetened with fruit juice concentrate to enhance flavor, is a fructose bomb disguised as healthy. Excess fructose, especially in liquid form, is absorbed quickly, and when the small intestine cannot process the full amount, it reaches the colon and feeds precisely the wrong bacteria, the biofilm formers. A 2018 study from the University of California, San Diego, published in Cell Metabolism, showed that fructose in high concentrations in the colon stimulates the expression of virulence genes in bacteria, such as pathogenic Escherichia coli, increasing their ability to adhere to the intestinal wall and form biofilms. That is, the green juice you drink with the best of intentions may be providing the exact substrate that bad bacteria need to fortify. The common mistake is to believe that everything natural is automatically beneficial for the intestine. The dose, form of presentation, and frequency matter. The fructose of a whole apple, eaten in the peel, with its soluble and insoluble fibers balanced, is processed in a completely different way than the liquid fructose of a juice, which arrives like a tsunami in the intestine. The physiological mechanism is as follows. The fructose transporter in the small intestine, called GLUT5, has a limited capacity. When you ingest too much fructose at once, especially without the whole fruit matrix, GLUT5 saturates, the unabsorbed fructose goes to the colon, and fermenting bacteria transform it into gases and acids that lower the local pH even more, but in an uncontrolled way, favoring pathogenic aciduric species. This is the opposite of what butyrate does, which is a controlled and beneficial acidification. The connection to real life is that many people who complain of bloating, gas, and mental fog are precisely the ones most engaged in consuming natural products, green juices, and kombuchas. They're doing everything they think is right, and they're getting worse. Mrs. Irene, whom I mentioned before, drank a green juice every morning, made with cabbage, apple, cucumber, and ginger, blended in a blender. When I asked her to suspend the juice for 2 weeks and replace it with warm water, and then, in the middle of the morning, a whole apple eaten in the skin, chewed slowly, her belly deflated in 5 days. 5 days. It wasn't the kale, it wasn't the cucumber, it was the liquid form and the speed of fructose ingestion that were keeping the pathogenic fermentation cycle active in her colon. This is what almost no one explains. What's more, industrialized green juices often contain inulin or chicory as a source of prebiotic fiber. Inulin is a soluble fiber that, in theory, feeds good bacteria, but in a gut with installed bacterial overgrowth, inulin can ferment in the wrong place, in the small intestine, and dramatically worsen gas and bloating. A 2017 study from Monash University in Australia, published in the Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology, demonstrated that individuals with SIBO undergoing an inulin-rich diet experienced a significant increase in expired hydrogen production and symptoms of distension. Inulin, which was supposed to be an ally, became fuel for the enemy. The lesson here is, the gut context determines whether a food will be medicine or poison. And the context of most people over 50 who have spent decades consuming refined flours and antibiotics is of an intestine with dysbiosis and biofilm. For these people, the introduction of prebiotics such as inulin should be gradual and monitored, and not in the form of concentrated juices. The sixth revelation, and one of the most important, is about a compound that acts as a natural solvent of intestinal biofilm, but that almost no one uses in the right way. That compound is N-acetylcysteine, often abbreviated as NAC. NAC is a derivative of the amino acid cysteine and is primarily known as a mucolytic, i.e., an agent that breaks down the disulfide bonds that maintain the structure of mucoproteins. Intestinal biofilm is largely composed of a matrix of mucopolysaccharides and proteins that bacteria produce to protect themselves. NAC breaks down these disulfide bonds and destabilizes the biofilm matrix, exposing the bacteria to the environment and allowing the immune system and beneficial bacteria to reach them. A 2014 study from the Department of Microbiology at the University of Milan, published in the Journal of Medical Microbiology, demonstrated that NAC was able to dismantle biofilms of intestinal pathogenic bacteria at clinically achievable concentrations. However, NAC is not only available as a supplement. It is present in precursors in foods such as raw garlic, red onion, and boiled egg white, which are rich in cysteine. But here's the mistake that negates the benefit. Cooking garlic and onions at high temperatures destroys allicin and oxidizes cysteine, drastically reducing the bioavailability of sulfur compounds. Garlic needs to be crushed and allowed to sit for 10 minutes before being consumed raw so that the enzyme allinase converts the alline into allicin, which is the active compound. And the egg white needs to be cooked just enough to curdle, without browning, to preserve the integrity of the cysteine. Another food rich in NAC precursors is broccoli, especially broccoli sprouts, which contain sulforaphane, a compound that, in addition to breaking down biofilms, activates liver detoxification genes. A 2019 study from Johns Hopkins University, published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry, showed that sulforaphane from broccoli sprouts inhibits the formation of biofilms of Helicobacter pylori and other pathogenic bacteria. But the common mistake is to cook broccoli until it is mushy and yellowish, which destroys the enzyme myrosinase, which is needed to convert glucoraphanin into sulforaphane. Broccoli should be steamed for a maximum of 3 to 4 minutes until it turns bright green, or eaten raw in salads. The connection to real life is straightforward, but I need to be careful here. Supplementation with NAC should be discussed with a healthcare professional, because inappropriate doses can cause gastric irritation. But dietary consumption of cysteine precursors, in the form of raw garlic crushed in a drizzle of olive oil, or thinly sliced raw red onion in salad, is safe for most people and can contribute significantly to the gradual dismantling of biofilm. Mr. Antonio, the former marketer I mentioned, included half a clove of crushed raw garlic at lunch, mixed with ready-made rice and beans so as not to heat the garlic. He told me that he felt a difference in digestion in the first week, a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He described it as if a paste that lined his intestine was slowly being dissolved. It's a layman's description, but physiologically accurate. The NAC and sulfur compounds in garlic were, in fact, breaking down the biofilm matrix. The seventh progressive revelation, and I want you to pay close attention to it, is about magnesium's role in gut cleansing and the blunder that most make when supplementing. Magnesium is an essential mineral for more than 300 enzymatic reactions in the body, and one of them is the relaxation of intestinal smooth muscle. Peristalsis relies on a balance between contraction and relaxation. If the intestine is chronically tense, with spasms, the transit is disorganized. Magnesium relaxes the muscles and allows peristaltic waves to propagate in a coordinated manner. In addition, magnesium draws water into the colon by osmosis, softening the stool. But the mistake lies in the form of magnesium chosen. Magnesium oxide, which is the best seller and the cheapest, has a very low bioavailability, around 4%. The rest goes straight through the intestine, which can cause diarrhea and cramps, which people interpret as cleansing, but it is not. it is just an osmotic irritation. Chelated magnesium, such as magnesium glycinate or magnesium citrate, has much higher bioavailability and is absorbed efficiently, relaxing the muscles from the inside out without the aggressive laxative effect. A 2018 study from the University of Otago in New Zealand, published in Nutrients, showed that magnesium glycinate was significantly more effective than magnesium oxide at improving the frequency and consistency of bowel movements in older adults with functional constipation. But here's a detail that almost no one explains. Magnesium competes with calcium for absorption. If you take a supplement that combines calcium and magnesium, or if you consume a lot of dairy products along with magnesium, the absorption of both is impaired. Ideally, you should take magnesium away from dairy products, preferably at night, because it also helps with general relaxation and sleep quality. And food sources of magnesium are plentiful. Pumpkin seeds, sautéed spinach, almonds, bananas, avocados. But the common mistake is to consume these foods in preparations that block magnesium, such as spinach with sour cream or banana with milk. Oxalate from spinach and casein from milk form complexes that reduce magnesium absorption. Now I go to the penultimate block, the climax of this meeting, where I deliver the heaviest revelation, the most recent study, and the silent traitors who sabotage everything we've talked about so far. The most recent study I want to share was published in 2023 in the journal Nature Communications by researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. They discovered that gut biofilm is not just an inert plaque. It is metabolically active and communicates with the host's immune system through extracellular vesicles. These vesicles are small bubbles released by the bacteria in the biofilm, containing proteins, lipopolysaccharides, and even bacterial DNA fragments. They cross the intestinal barrier, especially when it is permeable, and fall into the circulation. Once in the blood, these vesicles are picked up by immune cells called macrophages, which interpret them as a threat and trigger an inflammatory response. The Israeli study showed that these vesicles derived from intestinal biofilms are capable of reaching the liver, pancreas, and even adipose tissue, contributing to insulin resistance and hepatic steatosis, the accumulation of fat in the liver, even in people who do not consume alcohol. This means that a chronically biofilmed gut may be behind a fatty liver that no routine blood test can fully explain. What's more, vesicles can cross the blood-brain barrier when systemic inflammation is elevated, and have been found in the brains of Alzheimer's disease patients in post-mortem studies, a line of research that is being actively investigated at the University of Southampton in the United Kingdom. The implication is profound. The biofilm in your gut may be sending inflammatory messengers to your brain, contributing to cognitive decline in a silent way. This is not a marginal hypothesis. In 2022, a study published in Brain, Behavior, and Immunity by researchers at the University of California, Los Angeles, found significantly elevated levels of bacterial lipopolysaccharides in the plasma of patients with mild cognitive impairment compared to healthy controls of the same age. These lipopolysaccharides are exactly what extracellular vesicles carry. The gut-brain connection is becoming the hottest field of neuroscience, and the message is clear. A dirty gut is a brain at risk. The traitors, those seemingly healthy foods or habits that sabotage everything in silence, I need to name them clearly. The first traitor is the excess of commercial fermented products with added sugars or artificial sweeteners, as I have already mentioned. The second traitor is the nighttime consumption of teas with soothing properties that contain calories, such as golden milk with honey, the famous golden milk. Honey is fructose and glucose and disrupts the nocturnal migratory motor complex. If you take this to sleep, you're shutting down your bowel cleansing system at a time when it should be most active. The third traitor, and perhaps the most surprising, is the intense physical exercise done right after meals. The common belief is that a walk after lunch helps with digestion. A light walk, in fact, can help. But intense exercise, such as a weight training session or a jog, diverts blood flow from the gut to the muscles, reducing intestinal perfusion and impairing proper chyme formation and nutrient absorption. Worse, intense exercise in an intestine with biofilm and increased permeability can exacerbate the passage of lipopolysaccharides into the bloodstream, generating a post-exercise inflammatory peak that cancels out part of the benefits of physical activity. A 2017 study from the Australian Institute of Sport, published in the International Journal of Sports Medicine, showed that endurance athletes with pre-existing intestinal permeability had elevated levels of endotoxins in their blood after intense training sessions, and this was associated with symptoms of chronic fatigue and decreased performance. For the listener over 50, the message is, exercise is essential, but the time and intensity need to respect the state of your intestine. Ideally, the most intense exercise should be done on an empty stomach or away from large meals, and that after meals you should only take a light walk for 10 to 15 minutes without straining. The fourth traitor is the indiscriminate use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, such as ibuprofen and diclofenac, which many people take for chronic joint pain. These drugs inhibit cyclooxygenase by reducing the production of prostaglandins that protect the intestinal mucosa. Chronic use of these anti-inflammatories is associated with an increase in intestinal permeability and a degradation of the mucus layer, paving the way for bacterial vesicles to enter the circulation. A 2021 study from the University of Nottingham, published in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics, showed that regular use of ibuprofen for just 4 weeks resulted in a significant increase in markers of intestinal permeability in healthy volunteers. If you take these medications regularly, talk to your doctor about alternatives or about gastric and intestinal protection strategies. The fifth traitor, and this one is subtle, is the consumption of artificial sweeteners, especially sucralose and aspartame, thinking they are harmless because they have no calories. They may not have calories, but they profoundly alter the composition of the gut microbiota, favoring pathogenic bacteria and harming butyrate-producing bacteria. A 2014 study by the Weizmann Institute, published in Nature, showed that the consumption of artificial sweeteners induced glucose intolerance in mice and in humans through changes in the gut microbiota. The connection with intestinal cleansing is direct. If the microbiota is unbalanced, the biofilm strengthens and the vicious cycle continues. I now describe the cellular process as a scene so that you can visualize what happens when all these pieces fall into place. Imagine your colon as a large avenue that has been neglected for years. On the walls there is a dark, hardened crust, which has reduced the passage space. This crust is the biofilm, a fortified city of bacteria that communicate with each other by chemical signals. You start introducing warm water on an empty stomach, and it's as if a fine, steady rain starts to soften the surface of that crust. Heat activates the receptors, and peristalsis initiates a gentle sweep. Then, you introduce the resistant starch from the cooled potato, and the good bacteria, the Faecalibacterium, which were almost extinct, receive food and begin to multiply. They produce butyrate, and butyrate is like a natural solvent that begins to erode the crustal matrix from within, while nourishing the cells in the intestinal wall, which were fragile and scaling. The L-threonine from cooked chickpeas arrives and provides the raw material to rebuild the protective mucus layer, a smooth and healthy new paint on the wall. Deep diaphragmatic breathing at night acts as a compressor that pushes out stagnant lymph, draining the swelling and allowing the local immune system, GALT, to receive the biofilm vesicles that are being released and mount a precise response. Finally, the sulfur compounds in the crushed raw garlic act as guided missiles that break the disulfide bridges of the matrix, dismantling the fortifications. The magnesium in glycinate or pumpkin seeds relaxes the muscles, allowing cleansing waves to travel through the colon without spasms. The biofilm begins to detach, not in large plates that cause obstruction, but in microfragments that are eliminated in the daily evacuations, almost imperceptible, but continuous. Each day, the inner diameter of the colon increases slightly, the absorption of magnesium and B vitamins improves, systemic inflammation drops, zonulin levels normalize, tight junctions close, and the gut ceases to be a source of toxins to become a hub for the production of serotonin, dopamine, and energy. You're not just cleansing your gut, you're silently de-inflaming your brain, your liver, your joints. You are regaining the mental clarity, the willingness, the joie de vivre that chronic inflammation had hijacked. And now, my friend, I address you directly, who are listening to me this far. I know you've tried a lot of things. I know you've spent money on products that promised miracles and delivered frustration. I know you looked in the mirror and thought that tiredness, forgetfulness, a swollen belly were just the price of getting older. And I'm here, after decades in the office, looking into your eyes to tell you that this is not true. Aging is not a sentence of inevitable degeneration. The human body has a capacity for regeneration and cleansing that goes far beyond what we have been told. What was missing was the correct information, the patient explanation, the scientific authority with no commercial interests behind it. What was missing was someone who sat down with you and said, "The system is not giving you the time and information you deserve, but I will give it to you now. You don't need chemicals to cleanse your gut because your body already has the most sophisticated cleansing machinery out there. You just need to stop sabotaging it with the errors that negate the benefit and start providing the correct signals and substrates that physiology asks for. Warm water on an empty stomach at the temperature and in the form I taught. Resistant starch from boiled and cooled potatoes to produce butyrate. L-threonine from chickpeas to rebuild mucus. Diaphragmatic breathing lying down with legs elevated to activate the lymphatic system and the vagus nerve. Crushed raw garlic for sulfur compounds. Magnesium from bioavailable sources to relax the muscles. And above all, the patience to understand that the biofilm that took years to form is not going to disappear in 3 days. But in 2 weeks, the signs of improvement are already noticeable. In 4 weeks, laboratory tests such as fecal calprotectin and C-reactive protein can show an objective drop. In 3 months, the transformation in mood and mental clarity is usually so evident that the people around you notice it. This content is educational and was designed to complement, never replace, individualized medical follow-up. Everybody has its own story, and your trusted doctor needs to know about the changes you intend to implement. But autonomy over one's own health begins with quality information, and that is what I hope to have delivered to you in this meeting. I want you to share this video with someone you love who is suffering in silence, thinking there is no way out. Share it as an act of care, as if to say, I care about you. I want you to live with more energy, with more clarity, with more presence. Because gut health isn't about vanity, it's not about aesthetics, it's not about fads. It's about the ability to be whole in conversations with your grandchildren, to remember names, to wake up wanting to make plans, to look in the mirror and recognize the person who is there. It's about not becoming a burden to the one you love. It is about aging with dignity, with autonomy, with the intestine functioning as a health plant and not as a toxic waste dump. If you've made it this far, you've already understood what the 15-minute consultation never allowed you to say. Now it's up to you. The science is there, the mechanisms are explained, the path is before you. Take care of yourself, and see you at the next meeting.